I don't remember the first time I realized I was invisible. Maybe it wasn't a single moment, but a slow unfolding, like fog creeping into a room until you can't see what's right in front of you. All I know is that by the time I was old enough to count the candles on my birthday cake, I had already learned that my brother's name would always echo louder than mine in our house. Mike. Just saying it feels like I'm calling back a ghost that was never mine to hold. He was 2 years younger, smaller, and fragile-looking in the way that made people soften around him. When he cried, my mother ran. When he smiled, my father's face lit up. When I achieved something, a good grade, a drawing I worked on for days, a chore done without being asked, it passed through them like wind. No reaction, just silence. At first, I tried harder. Children always do. I became helpful, quiet, polite. I thought maybe if I didn't make trouble, I'd be seen. I cleaned the table before dinner, I folded laundry that wasn't mine, I waited my turn to talk. But no matter how much I tried, I could never make their eyes stay on me. Mom's whole world revolved around Mike. She'd cook his favorite meals, defend him when he was wrong, and talk about him as if he were the center of her universe. "He's sensitive," she'd say, as if that explained everything. "He needs extra love." Maybe he did, but didn't I? Dad was quieter, gentle but absent. He didn't scold, but he also didn't protect. He existed on the sidelines, working long hours, sometimes smiling faintly at me across the table. I clung to those smiles like they were rare sunlight. They weren't enough, but they were all I had. The only person who truly saw me was my grandfather. He had soft hands and the kind of patience that made you feel safe just sitting beside him. When I was little, he'd call me his little light. I didn't understand what that meant then, but I know now. He saw something in me that my parents refused to see. He noticed when I was sad. He asked questions no one else asked. "Are you okay, Anna? Do you feel lonely?" Simple words, but to me they were oxygen. He died when I was 12. The morning I found out, my mother told me at breakfast as if she were reading the weather report. "Your grandfather passed away last night," she said, pouring coffee. Mike asked if he could still go to his friend's house after school. I remember the cup shaking in my hand. I wanted to scream, to break the plates, to make them feel something, but I just nodded. I went to my room, sat on the bed, and cried until my chest hurt. That was the day I realized how silent grief can be when no one else is willing to share it with you. After that, I built my own world. Books, journals, daydreams. I wrote things I never said out loud, letters to my grandfather, notes to a version of my mother that might have loved me differently. I became good at pretending I didn't care. I told myself I didn't need anyone. That lie kept me standing. When I left for college, I thought maybe distance would fix things. Maybe Mom would miss me. Maybe Dad would notice the quiet. But when I came home for the holidays, it was like I'd never left. The same imbalance, the same conversations circling around Mike's life, his grades, his friends, his struggles. My achievements were background noise. "That's nice, Anna," Mom would say, before turning to Mike again. The anger that had once burned in me cooled into something worse, indifference, or maybe exhaustion. I stopped trying to be seen. It was easier to let them talk and smile and exist in their little world where I was only a shadow in the corner. Then came Lucas. I met him when I was 23 at a small coffee shop near my job. He was sitting alone, sketching something in a notebook. When I accidentally spilled my drink near his table, he looked up and smiled instead of frowning. "Looks like you needed another cup anyway," he said. That smile, calm, kind, unhurried, felt like an invitation. We talked for hours that day. It wasn't anything romantic yet, just easy. He asked about my work, my favorite books, what made me laugh. No one had asked me those questions in years. With him, I felt like I didn't have to fight to exist. Over time, he became the first person who didn't just listen, he remembered. If I mentioned something once, he'd bring it up later like it mattered. "How did that project go? Did you ever finish that painting?" Small things, but to me, they were everything. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be loved without conditions. Lucas never asked me to be smaller, quieter, or better. He just let me be. When I told him about my family, about Mike and my mother, he didn't interrupt or try to fix it. He just said, "That sounds really lonely." And I cried, not because he said something profound, but because he understood without judgment. When he proposed, I hesitated. Not because I doubted him, but because part of me still carried the fear that love could disappear without warning. That maybe I wasn't made for being chosen. He held my hand and said, "You don't have to earn my love, Anna. You just have to accept it." I wish that had been the end of the story, me finally being happy. But life doesn't erase old wounds just because you've found new warmth. I carried my past into my future like a suitcase I didn't know how to unpack. Still, when Lucas and I started planning our wedding, I decided to invite my family. It felt like the right thing to do, the adult thing. A chance to start over, maybe. He asked if I was sure, and I said yes, because some part of me still wanted to believe that blood ties could heal with time. I told myself it would be different, that maybe my mother would see me now, not as the quiet child she ignored, but as a woman standing on her own. I wanted her to be proud. I wanted my father to smile at me like he used to, back when his silence still felt like love. I didn't know then that hope could still break you, even after you think you've grown immune. Part 2, the breaking point. When the day of the wedding finally came, the morning felt almost too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you think something is waiting just behind it. I tried to tell myself it was just nerves. Everyone feels that before they get married. Lucas looked calm, but I could tell he was watching me carefully, like he always did when he sensed I was holding something in. I told him I was fine, and in that moment I almost believed it. I'd spent weeks choosing everything: the small garden venue, the pale flowers, the soft music. I wanted it to feel warm, peaceful, intimate. A day built around love, not performance. I'd even found a way to include my family without giving them center stage. They had seats close enough to see everything, but not so close that I'd feel their presence suffocating me. When I saw my mother that morning, her first words weren't "You look beautiful." They were, "I hope Mike got here on time. He was out late last night." I smiled tightly and said, "I'm sure he'll make it." I was wearing a wedding dress, and somehow I still wasn't the main character in my own story. My father hugged me a little awkwardly and whispered, "You look just like your mother did when we married." I think he meant it as a compliment, but it landed like a bruise. My mother had been adored that day. I was just tolerated. Still, I tried. I smiled through the ceremony. I looked at Lucas and felt that calm warmth wash over me, the kind that said, "You made it, Anna, you're safe now." When we exchanged vows, I saw tears in his eyes, not showy or dramatic, just quiet, honest emotion. For a while, it drowned out everything else. Then came the reception. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, it all blurred into a kind of golden haze. I remember thinking that maybe, finally, I could stop looking over my shoulder. My family was there, yes, but for once, they weren't the center of my world. I was surrounded by people who loved me, who chose to be there for me. And then Mike stood up. He wasn't supposed to give a speech. I hadn't asked him to. He clinked his glass anyway, and people turned toward him with polite smiles. I felt something in my stomach twist. His grin was wide, too wide. "I just wanted to say," he began, "that I'm so happy for my sister. Really. I mean, it's about time, right?" Laughter rippled through the room. I forced a smile, gripping Lucas's hand under the table. Then he cleared his throat dramatically and said, "And since we're all celebrating love today, I have some news too." I remember the moment freezing around me. My mother gasped, not in horror, but in delight. My father clapped his hands. Mike announced that he and his girlfriend were engaged, and the room erupted in cheers. People stood up. Cameras flashed. My mother ran to hug him. My father shook his hand. The attention, every bit of it, shifted. I sat there, a bride on her wedding day, watching my family celebrate my brother as if the universe had revolved around him once again. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just went still. Lucas's hand tightened around mine, but I couldn't move. It was like every invisible moment of my life had condensed into that single instant. The same silence, the same erasure, the same hollow ache that had followed me since childhood. When my mother finally came to hug me, it wasn't to apologize. It was to say, "Can you believe it?" Both my children engaged at once. "What are the odds?" I whispered. "Please stop." But she didn't hear me. Lucas stood up then, his voice calm but firm. "That's enough," he said. He led me away from the table, out of the reception hall, out into the night. The cold air hit my face like a slap, but it felt cleaner than the air inside. We stood in the parking lot for a long time. I didn't say anything. I think part of me was waiting to wake up, to find that it hadn't happened. Lucas wrapped his jacket around my shoulders and said quietly, "You don't have to go back in." I didn't. We left, just like that. The music, the laughter, the celebration, it all faded behind us. I remember looking back once, through the window, and seeing my mother laughing, her hand on Mike's arm. It was like watching my childhood replay itself, only this time I had a choice. That night in the small apartment we'd rented for our honeymoon, I cried until there was nothing left in me. Not just for the wedding, for everything. For every moment I had tried to be good enough. For every time I had made myself smaller. For every version of me that had hoped for something that was never coming. When the tears stopped, I felt something I hadn't felt before, emptiness, but also clarity. Like I'd finally reached the bottom of something, and now I could climb out. Lucas didn't say much that night. He just held me, letting me fall apart in peace. When I could finally speak, I said, "I'm done trying." He asked softly, "Trying what?" "To make them love me." He nodded. "Good." The next morning, I sent a single message to my parents. I told them I needed space and that they shouldn't contact me for a while. My father replied with, "Okay, if that's what you need." My mother wrote back a paragraph about how I was being dramatic and how family should forgive and forget. I didn't reply. Weeks turned into months. The silence felt strange at first, like missing a noise you hated but had learned to live with. But slowly I started to feel lighter. Lucas and I built a small life together, nothing grand but full of small, steady joys. We cooked dinner together. We took long walks. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since I was a child. It wasn't about talent, it was about color, about making something of my own. But even peace has its shadows. There were nights when I'd wake up from dreams where my mother was calling me, her voice sharp and disappointed. Sometimes I'd imagine running into Mike at a store or seeing my parents at a cafe, and my chest would tighten. Forgiveness wasn't simple. It wasn't a moment, it was a long, uneven road. One afternoon, while cleaning the living room, I found an old photo, me and my grandfather sitting in his garden. I looked at my face in that picture, small and serious, and felt tears sting my eyes. "You did it," I whispered to that little girl. "You got out." That night, I told Lucas about the memory. He listened, then said, "Maybe now it's time to build something just for you, not in reaction to them." He was right. I started writing, not for anyone else, not to be read, but to understand. Pages and pages of memories, thoughts, questions. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of my healing, turning my pain into words, giving shape to things that had only ever existed as silence. Sometimes I still thought about my family, not with hate anymore, but with a kind of distant sadness. I realized they'd given me more than wounds, they'd given me the strength to build my own worth from scratch. Still, I knew I wasn't free yet, not completely. That freedom, the real kind, would come later, when life forced me to face them again.